1:15. This is the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation. The news edited by Romesh Piris, read by Soundit Thavam. 2 more areas isolated in Colombo and Gampaha. The Health Ministry says the daily count of COVID-19 positive cases is on the increase. The National Medicines Regulatory Authority approves the COVID-19 Moderna vaccine for emergency use in Sri Lanka. Regulations on foreign exchange extended. The government to provide dry rations worth 5,000 rupees to places of worship. Arrivals from 6 Middle Eastern countries will be barred from entering Sri Lanka from the 1st of July. The Education Secretary explains the ministry's blueprint for reopening schools under the new normal in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. In international news, the presidents of China and Russia hailed stronger ties. In sports, it's cricket. The first ODI of the Sri Lanka Tour of England gets underway at Chesterley Street in County Durham today. The National Operations Centre for the Prevention of COVID-19 said several areas in the Colombo and Gampaha districts have been isolated from 6 a.m. this morning. Accordingly, all parts of the Singhapura Gramanidari division, except for the Sun in the 7 apartment complex of the Vallampitiya police area in the Colombo district, and the Galborella 100 Vatta Gramanidari division of the Kalaniya police area in the Gampaha district, have been isolated. Meanwhile, the National Operations Centre for the Prevention of COVID-19 outbreaks said isolation orders imposed within 11 areas in the Gampaha, Nuwara, Galle, Batticaloa and Ampara districts were also lifted at 6 this morning. With the identification of 1,890 new COVID infections yesterday, the total number of COVID infections in the country has increased to 255,508. The Department of Government Information stated that 1,850 among the COVID cases identified yesterday were reported from the Auruddu cluster. According to official data, as many as 221,249 patients who were infected with the virus have recovered so far. Meanwhile, the Director General of Health Services confirmed that the death toll has increased to 2,985. The National Medicines Regulatory Authority has approved the COVID-19 Moderna vaccine for emergency use in Sri Lanka. Accordingly, Sri Lanka has thus far approved the Chinese-manufactured Sinopharm vaccine, the Russian-manufactured Sputnik V vaccine, and the Oxford-AstraZeneca Covishield vaccine for emergency use in Sri Lanka. The Ministry of Health approved the administration of the Pfizer-BioNTech or Moderna COVID-19 vaccine dose for individuals who were administered the Covishield vaccine as their first jab. The State Minister Channa Jayasumana said 26,000 Pfizer vaccine doses and 1 million Moderna vaccine doses are due to arrive in the island during the first 2 weeks of July. Meanwhile, another 69,919 COVID-19 vaccine doses have been administered in the country. The Ministry of Health said yesterday the first dose of the Sinopharm vaccine was administered to 30,966 persons, while 37,812 received the second dose. The second dose of the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine was also administered to 1,141 persons thus far. Accordingly, 3,535,996 vaccine doses have been administered in the country against COVID-19 since January. The Cabinet of Ministers has granted approval to further extend the order issued to impose certain restrictions on foreign exchange remittances. Accordingly, restrictions on foreign exchange remittances will remain in place for a further 6 months from the 2nd of July. The government issued orders under Section 22 of the Foreign Exchange Act of 2017 to suspend external remittances related to certain transactions, taking into account the negative impact on the country's foreign reserves and the foreign exchange market due to the COVID-19 pandemic. According to the cabinet paper presented by the Prime Minister, the central bank has recommended the extension to minimize the potential risk in the foreign exchange market and maintain the stability of the financial system. The Cabinet has approved the launch of a program to provide dry rations to places of worship in distress due to non-receipt of alms from donors due to the COVID-19 pandemic in the country. The proposal has been submitted by Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa in his capacity as the Minister of Religious and Cultural Affairs. Accordingly, parcels of dry rations worth 5,000 rupees will be donated to identified temples and places of worship through the program. The dry rations will be purchased from Lanka Satosa Limited and distributed through its distribution unit. This news broadcast comes to you from the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation. Arrivals from 6 Middle Eastern countries will be temporarily barred from entering Sri Lanka from the 1st of July. The Airport and Aviation Services Limited said passengers with a travel history in the past 14 days to Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain and Oman will not be permitted to disembark in Sri Lanka until the 13th of July. The Vice Chairman Rajiv Suryarachi said the decision has been conveyed to all airlines by the Civil Aviation Authority. He said, however, travellers from such countries will be able to transit using Lankan airports. Meanwhile, arrivals from 8 countries of the African continent have also been barred from entering Sri Lanka. Accordingly, persons who visited Angola, Botswana, Lesotho, Mozambique, Namibia, Swaziland, Zambia and Zimbabwe during the past 14 days will not be allowed to enter Sri Lanka from the 1st of July for a period of 1 month. The report by the committee appointed to amend existing laws on marriage, divorce and minors in the country has been handed over to Minister of Justice Ali Sabri. The programme is part of efforts to amend outdated laws and is focused on updating the legal system to suit modern times. The committee comprises of 12 members. The Justice Ministry said the objective is to update marriage and divorce laws that have not been amended since independence. The country's divorce law has been in place since 1906. Meanwhile, another legislation proposed is the draft bill to register Sri Lankan related divorces finalised overseas to be registered locally. The ministry claimed thousands of Lankans are currently residing overseas and their inability to register divorces finalised by expatriates resulting in issues related to minors as well as concerns over assets. Meeting with the farmer community in the Eastern Province, the Minister of Agriculture Mahindananda Alutkamage said preparations have been made to purchase paddy through the Paddy Marketing Board throughout the island during this Yalla season as well as the Maha season. The purchase of paddy for the Yalla season commenced over the weekend at the Mullamane Paddy Marketing Board warehouse in Batticaloa. Harvesting of paddy in the Yalla season in the Ampara, Batticaloa and Polonnaruwa districts commenced and the government will continue to purchase paddy during this season. That concludes local news.
The main news story is brought to you by Siddhalepa Vedamahatmya.
Life during COVID-19 pandemic is difficult for parents and children alike. The return to schools is an important and hopefully a welcome step. While protecting children under strict health guidelines, the Education Secretary Kapila Pereira said the Education Ministry is exploring ways to reopen schools, giving priority to a vaccination program. He stressed that children and teachers alike have to adapt to the near-normal conditions, adhering strictly to health guidelines to prevent the spread of the disease. He further said children already have access to educational programs aired on 20 TV channels from their homes and came to you in the main news story.
The main news story was brought to you by Siddhalepa Vedamahatmya.
On to Watchlight, a hotline has been introduced for doctors to monitor COVID-19 positive patients until they are escorted to an interim treatment centre. Accordingly, patients will be able to receive medical advice and their condition will be monitored via the new hotline 1390 and came to you in Watchlight. On to a bulletin of world news in the headlines. The presidents of China and Russia hail stronger ties. Ethiopia declares a unilateral ceasefire in the Tigray region. The UN Human Rights Chief calls for reparations over racism. The presidents of China and Russia have agreed to oppose interference in each other's internal affairs under the guise of democracy and human rights. China said that President Xi Jinping and Russia's Vladimir Putin also expressed their opposition to unilateral sanctions at an online summit held yesterday. This came after the group of 7 leaders issued a joint communique underscoring the importance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. The Chinese and Russian governments said their leaders formally agreed at the summit to extend a friendship and cooperation treaty between the two countries, which was signed 2 decades ago. The Ethiopian government has declared a ceasefire in the Tigray region 8 months after Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed sent troops to oust its leadership. The announcement came as witnesses reported anti-government troops in the streets of Tigray's capital Mekelle. All sides have been accused of carrying out mass killings and human rights violations. More than 5 million people are in urgent need of food aid, the UN says, with 350,000 facing famine. The United Nations Human Rights Council has urged global action, including reparations, to make amends for racism against people of African descent. Its new report also urged educational reform and apologies to address discrimination. The findings cite concerns in about 60 countries, including the UK, Belgium, France, Canada, Brazil and Colombia. The study began after the murder of George Floyd, an unarmed black man in US police custody in 2020. To conclude this bulletin of world news, the headlines again. The presidents of China and Russia hail stronger ties. Ethiopia declares a unilateral ceasefire in the Tigray region. And the UN Human Rights Chief calls for reparations over racism. That's world news. And looking at development news, the Hambantota International Port Group has partnered with Shenzhen Xingji Group to set up a plug-and-play park-in-park manufacturing facility within the port's industrial zone. The concept is a fully fledged standalone industrial facility with some very unique features set to operate within the Hambantota International Port's industrial zone. The signing of the joint venture agreements between the Xingji Group and HIPG took place at the Hambantota Maritime Centre earlier in the month. Looking at sports news, it's cricket. The first ODI of the Sri Lanka Tour of England will begin at Chesterley Street in County Durham at 3:30 p.m. local time. England have won 8 of their previous 14 ODIs at Chesterley Street, dating back to their maiden fixture at the venue against the West Indies in 2000. Sri Lanka, however, have won both their previous ODIs against England at the ground by 8 wickets in 2006 and by 157 runs in 2014. They also beat the West Indies at the 2019 World Cup but lost to South Africa in the same tournament for a 3-1 overall record. Meanwhile, Shikhar Dhawan-led Indian white ball squad arrived in the island to lock horns in 3 ODIs and T20s, and the ODI will be played from the 13th to the 18th of July. The 3 T20s will be played on July 21st, 23rd and 25th. All matches will be played at the R. Premadasa Stadium in Colombo. Dhawan is leading the national side for the first time in his career in the absence of regular India skipper Virat Kohli and his deputy Rohit Sharma. The players had gathered in Mumbai and were in a 2-week quarantine before flying to the island. That's sports news. Business news up next.
Contributory deposit of 1,000 rupees from NSB when your child enters grade 1. Open a Hapan Children's Service account for your kid today. Higher interest. Conditions apply. Business News. Sponsored by National Savings Bank. The safest place for your money.
The Commercial Bank of Ceylon has once again been named among the global giants in banking, becoming the only Sri Lankan bank to be ranked in the top 1,000 world banks announced annually by the Banker magazine of the UK for the 11th consecutive year in 2021. The country's benchmark private bank said it has reaffirmed its consistency by becoming the Sri Lankan bank to remain for the longest period on this authoritative global ranking, published for the 51st year, demonstrating its indomitable spirit and inherent financial strength. That's business news. Economic news up next.
Business News. Sponsored by National Savings Bank. The safest place for your money. Contributory deposit of 1,000 rupees from NSB when your child enters grade 1. Open a Hapan Children's Service account for your kid today. Higher interest. Conditions apply.
On to economic news. The Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Professor W.D. Lakshman, says the newly enacted legislative framework for the Port City Colombo project will help raise non-debt foreign exchange inflows for Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka's Parliament on May 20th approved a bill to establish a service-oriented special economic zone in 269 hectares of land reclaimed from the ocean and annexed to the city of Colombo. Professor Lakshman said Sri Lanka's external debt has been brought down despite adverse conditions posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. He said the CBSL was judiciously managing imports and foreign reserves. That's economic news.
Weather report was sponsored by
Dialogue, in partnership with the Ministry of Education, introduces Nanasa, a trilingual educational mobile app with video-based lessons for grade 1 to A-levels. Now your child can study with ease on your mobile with no subscription fee.
The Department of Meteorology forecast showers to occur at times in the Sabaragamu province and in the Gaul, Matara, Kandy and Nuwara districts. Several spells of showers can be expected in the western and northwestern provinces. The department further predicts showers or thundershowers to occur at a few places in the Uva and eastern provinces and in the Mullaitivu district in the evening or night.
Weather report was sponsored by
Dialogue, in partnership with the Ministry of Education, introduces Nanasa, a trilingual educational mobile app with video-based lessons for grade 1 to A-levels. Now your child can study with ease on your mobile with no subscription fee.
To conclude this bulletin of news, a recap of the headlines. 2 more areas isolated in Colombo and Kampaha. The Health Minister says the daily count of COVID-19 positive cases is on the increase. The National Medicines Regulatory Authority approves the COVID-19 Moderna vaccine for emergency use in Sri Lanka. Regulations on foreign exchange extended. The government to provide dry rations worth 5,000 rupees to places of worship. Arrivals from 6 Middle Eastern countries will be barred from entering Sri Lanka from the 1st of July. The Education Secretary explains the ministry's blueprint for reopening schools under the new normal in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. The presidents of China and Russia hail stronger ties. And the first ODI of the Sri Lanka tour of England gets underway at Chesterley Street in County Durham today. That concludes this afternoon's news broadcast.